Hi everyone, it's Thorn. Kind of a fun sort of nothing video for you today. So I have a lot of haul videos that come across my feed, and of course, like floating through social media, one of the reasons why I wanted to put down Instagram and Twitter, and especially Instagram, for at least a little while was because of how much money I realized I was spending kind of inadvertently just by being on it. Like, that algorithm knows me, okay? So, like, the ads that come up, first of all, I'm just like, yes, I do need that cute-ass witch hat. Or, like, yes, I do need this fancy whatever. And, like, over the course of years, that has a really big impact on one's budget. And not even just, like, targeted ads, but even just following people, whether they're consciously witchy influencers or they're actually just our friends, and seeing all of the neat witchy stuff that people have and realizing kind of like how much time I'm spending on social media and how that negatively impacts my budget. Because of course, like, stuff is fun. I love stuff. I'm not anti-stuff. This is not anti-haul video or anything like that. But I thought it might be useful or fun to talk for a minute about what I am not buying, especially given how long I've been practicing witchcraft. Like, I was thinking especially about the things that newcomers tend to spend money on when they first get involved. And I'm not saying that they shouldn't, okay? This isn't an anti-anything video necessarily. But I thought it would be interesting to point out, like, here are the things that I used to buy that I no longer buy because I realized that I personally was not using them and did not need them, even though Instagram still thinks I need these things. So 4 things for you, and I'd be very curious to hear what you all would put on your list. So item number 1 are fancy spell candles. I love candles, I make candles, I enjoy candles, but you know what I'm talking about? Like, there are a lot of retailers out there who sell dressed and fixed candles specifically for the practice of magic. And a lot of that happens within the context of witchcraft, and I'm not saying that sellers shouldn't do that, but as a witch, I sort of figured out, it took me too long, right? I'm really supposed to be doing a lot of that stuff for myself, right? Like, only I really know the intricacies of whatever it is my aim is magically, and I can dress a candle with herbs or oils or whatever the hell I think I want to use myself while pouring that intention into the thing. And then, especially if one can make one's own candles, which I realize most people can't, but if you have control over that stuff, then you can make exactly what you need. But aside from all that, what I found was that I love them and I buy them, but I don't use them because I think they're either like too fancy for regular use in the house. Like, oh, that's my nice candle. I don't want to burn it just like for any day of the week just because I want a candle burning. But then when a magical need arises, honestly, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the grocery store or the dollar store or wherever, and I'm going to get like the cheap tapers or the tea lights or whatever, and I'm going to carve and anoint those myself. So I found that a lot of these kind of beautiful crafted witchy candles I just don't have a use for. And I've got some that have been literally sitting around for years. A lot of them have stuff in them too that makes them not super safe to burn. An example, somebody gave me a candle that had seashells in it, and they were not just pressed into the wax, but actually melted into the wax. And what would happen is when you would light the wick, of course, the candle would sputter and the wick would move and the flame just, I don't know, something about the shells disrupting the flow of the wax that just made it a really inconsistently burning candle. And kind of the flame that I would get just always made me really uncomfortable. It was a little too big, a little too sputtery. You'll see people putting in like whole chunks of plants, which by themselves are flammable. So not super duper safe. I've seen candles with like plastics in them, like toys and charms, and they might be very pretty when they're just out of the mold, but they're kind of dangerous, at least if you're not monitoring them really closely. So no longer do I spend money on fancy candles. I go to the grocery store and I buy like the big boxes of the tapers in different colors. And that's just how my candle magic life looks these days. Item number 2, tons of bulk herbs. I think that there's something about becoming a witch that for a lot of people, like there's just this assumption that we need a big cupboard full of jars of herbs. And we just don't. Like even folks who practice herbal magics don't usually need like the giant jars with like dozens of different kinds of herbs. And the reason for that is because herbs have expiration dates. Like they're not just good indefinitely, and a lot of them are very expensive. So if you're ordering them online, there are lots of really great herb shops where you can get dried versions of whatever the hell you want from anywhere in the world, but they come in bulk. And like the shelf life of any given dried plant is usually only a matter of months, sometimes less than that. So spending tons and tons of money just because you want to feel like you have a full apothecary is something that it took me a long time to realize I shouldn't be doing. Because you realize when you move that you're just carrying around jars of things that are moldy, or at least they've lost their potency, they smell funny, whatever. And it also kind of robs you of the satisfaction, I think, of harvesting the thing fresh if you can. Because the other thing that was kind of horrifying when I started actually studying about plants and herbal magic was how many of those things that I could get just by like going walking locally. Like there's no reason to buy a lot of herbs dried when they grow everywhere. And thinking about things like dandelion root, or here in the South, like rosemary. It's like some of these plants that are like garden plants that are just everywhere, and you can get the live one at Home Depot and plant it somewhere and it'll live for 20 years and then you never have to buy the dried thing again. Yeah, so like nobody should buy dandelions. You shouldn't do that, especially if you live where I live. They're everywhere. So just kind of being a little bit more judicious about how I was spending my money with plant things. And also learning a lot about substitutions. I no longer will buy herbs that are like drastically not local. Like I've definitely seen spells in, recent books that entail organic materials that are like they're native to India or they're native to like wherever. Like they're not even remotely connected to like my locale, my practice, which I strive to kind of stay within my lane in terms of like my white American Europeanness. Like there's just lots of factors there to consider when you're making those kinds of purchases on a practical level as well as a magical one. The third thing, incense holders. Like with a couple of exceptions, I do appreciate a good censer. But incense holders, especially for stick incense, like I don't know why it took me so long to realize that I could just stick that motherfucker in a jar of dirt or something. Like I don't know. For a long time I had one of those like wooden incense burners with a lid that you can get at like Spencer's Gifts or some of these kind of cheap mall places. I got it in high school and I've carted it around and it would pinch my finger every time I tried to open it and I hated it and I still used it. And then one day I was just like, wait a second, I can put this in a jar of dirt and it was like my ritual life changed. I felt very silly. But same if you're burning on charcoal discs or you're using cone incense, like there's really no reason to spend money on specifically for incense burners unless you just found one that you love. For our censer, like on our coven altar, we literally just use a bowl, like a nothing to it ceramic bowl, and it's just filled with dirt and eventually like the old ash from burning the discs. It's not particularly pretty, although it could be if you wanted it to be. But there's no reason to spend lots of money on that stuff from a designated, like a cult supplier, unless that's just your jam. The final thing is piles of lots of different metaphysical planners and almanacs. And I really like these things. I love paper planners. I'm like inclined to spend money on those things. But it took a long time, again, longer than it should have, to realize that a lot of the information that I wanted that was in these planners was available in more detail and often to a greater degree of accuracy elsewhere. So for example, I buy the Farmer's Almanac, and like that has a lot of the best information in it, and that's pretty much the only almanac I buy. When I buy other kinds of almanacs, it's because they have articles in it. So like, for example, I love the Llewellyn annuals because they have articles. Like that's why I buy those. But I don't necessarily rely on specifically witchy planners for material, because a lot of the stuff that they write for farmers is just more detailed and more accurate, and it's cheaper, and you can get it at the grocery store. Plus, with all of the resources that we now have available online, instead of buying a lot of different kinds of planners, I'm a bullet journaler. I do like to keep a paper planner. I will just look that stuff up online and then copy those things as needed into my date book. Now, there are some planners out there that are really detailed. I know Benabel Wen produces a metaphysician's day planner that I've been drooling over for many years. There's a level of customization there. So there are practitioners out there who are providing stuff that looks really awesome. But for a lot of us, if you just need like moon phases and times and what the hell is Mercury doing and where's Sagittarius, what even is that, right? Like a lot of that stuff is available in greater detail for less money, different places. And doesn't entail spending a lot of money on lots of different, specifically produced for witches books. So those are my 4 things that came to the top of my list of things that I no longer spend money on. I'd love to hear what yours are. I think sometimes, like I said, like I love stuff, but I do think we get a little caught up sometimes in buying stuff that we don't need. And especially in COVID times, like I know that I've been a lot more stringent with my spending and my budgeting since the beginning of the pandemic. And I know most other folks are finding themselves in those positions as well, where they have to be more meticulous with their finances. So as witches, sometimes we just don't need the stuff. So yeah, hope you all are well. I'm going to go back to my very fulfilling day job, talking of finances, and I will see you all next time.